let's first think about, why do our young people need engaging instruction? Not only that, but how do you know that your students are actually engaged? Because students may appear to be listening, but are they truly learning the information? Or are they just being compliant and going through the motions of school? In Hampton City Schools, we felt that it was critical to get to the root of engagement to ensure that our students were provided with activities that allow them to not only absorb information, but to connect to and be engaged in their learning. So today, we're going to start with some talk about the human brain and learning. First, let's talk about short-term or working memory. Think of working memory like a loading dock, and there's only room for so many quote-unquote crates of information on the dock at one time. And if we add too many crates when the learner's mind is quote-unquote full, well, information is going to start falling off. In other words, students will no longer be retaining new information. So let's do a quick pop quiz. How many pieces of information can the average human brain hold in working memory at one time? Go ahead and pause the video to think or discuss about this answer, and resume the video when you are ready to debrief. Scientists used to think that the answer to this was about 7 pieces of information plus or minus 2. But there is new data suggesting that these days it might actually be closer to 4 pieces of information. And so therefore, if our short-term memory can only hold small amounts of information and long-term memory can hold larger amounts, we have to ask ourselves the question, how do we move what students need to know, understand, and are able to do from their short-term to their long-term memory? Because if we don't give students time to process the information, it will overload their working and their short-term memory, and therefore the information will either not be understood, or it may be misinterpreted or confused. So in other words, by not taking the time to let students process, we are actually slowing down their learning. So here in Hampton City Schools, we use something called the Absorb and Connect Do learning cycle, or the ABCD learning cycle. In this learning cycle, we understand that students can only absorb so much information before they need to connect it to other information or do something with it so that they can move it into their long-term memory. If a teacher stays locked in the absorb portion of the ABCD learning cycle too long, student understanding and retention of information will start to suffer. And that is why, even though sometimes as teachers we think that we need to present a ton of information to students and we don't have time for activities, this method of teaching can be quite inefficient if students are not actually retaining the information. So what are some common absorb activities? Well, the most common absorb activities usually involve reading, watching, or listening to material. And in your classroom, you might use activities such as lecturing, reading stories, watching videos, reading articles, playing music, and more. And these tend to be examples of passive learning unless you give students a specific connect-do activity to complete while they're absorbing. Now, remember, the passive learning is still a type of learning. The point we're trying to make is that it simply cannot be the only type of learning if we want students to retain what they're supposed to be learning. So to that end, let's take a look at some connect-do activities. Here are some common examples which engage our students in active learning, moving the information to long-term memory. We're also excited to introduce the HCS Instructional Technique Library, which is a collection of easy-to-implement instructional techniques for all classrooms. In the HCS Instructional Technique Library, we have created a collection of instructional techniques that work for the majority of content areas and grade levels with minor adaptations. These techniques can be used as connect-do activities, and for each technique's write-up, we've included not only a description of how to do the activity, but also classroom management considerations, potential adaptations for different developmental levels of students, examples of how techniques can be used in each subject area, and videos of HCS teachers implementing the strategies. Our instructional technique library has 4 main strategies, and they are non-linguistic representations, questioning, summarizing and note-taking, and collaboration. So let's take a look at our instructional technique library table of contents. First, you'll see the name of the overall strategy in yellow, in this case, non-linguistic representations. Next, you'll see the name of the technique itself, for instance, chatter drawings. You'll also find a brief summary of the description that can help you decide whether it's something you want to try with your class. And if you look to the right, you'll see a column for prep time, which shows how intense the level of prep is for this particular activity, and it gives you a hint about what kind of prep will be needed. For instance, there's a handout that comes with the chatter drawing that you can use. Next, you'll see the teaching time. This is the estimated amount of time that the technique actually takes to implement in the classroom. Because techniques can be modified to fit the needs of your students, keep in mind that, these are only estimates. And lastly, there's a designation for the implementation curve, or how easy or less easy it is for students to grasp what they have to do to be successful with the technique. So you can see here that something like show, don't tell is a pretty easy technique for students to understand. It's similar to Simon Says. Because online pedagogy is not the same as in-person pedagogy, HCS has also compiled a list of highly engaging online techniques that can be used in live Zoom sessions as well. And we do recommend that teachers vary these techniques, whether the traditional instructional techniques or the virtual ones, frequently, because using the same technique over and over will lower its engagement level. And we have also infused the instructional techniques into the curriculum documents. They'll be highlighted in this bright green, and when you click on the link, it will take you to the write-up of the instructional technique that will then give you lots of ideas for adapting the technique to make it fit in your particular classroom.